Parshat Vayishlach, one of the great moments in the early history of the creation of the Jewish nation, is the reconciliation, the meeting between Esau and Jacob. Jacob, who has been separated from his brother for 34 years, anticipates this moment, prepares for it in the greatest possible detail, but the actual moment, the meeting, in some ways climactic, in some ways a bit of an anticlimax. We're expecting a great showdown, we're expecting some, fireworks, and in fact there's no fireworks. They reconcile, two brothers meeting, they hug, they kiss, they chat, then they separate, they go their separate ways, and life moves on. It almost feels like, really? That's what you were so concerned about? And the Midrashim, the commentaries, are quite obsessed with the detail of the meeting. So, as recorded in the Torah, how the meeting unfolded and what actually happened. In addition to which, and this is not something that we should dismiss lightly, and I'm going to tread carefully here, Chazal, rightly or wrongly, I'm not suggesting wrongly, but broadly speaking, identified all enemies of the Jews as Esau. So whenever we have a reference in the Torah to Esau, somehow we're meant to, in our mind's eye, see this as a representation not of the moment in which it occurred, but somehow it has historical context or predictive context, because every confrontation between Jew and Gentile that will ever happen over the course of history is somehow represented in an Esau mention in the Torah. In which case, the mention, this description of the meeting between Jacob and Esau, at this, by the way, the final time we ever see them together in the Torah, is remarkable and requires attention to detail. So I'm all that by way of introduction. We're going to read the pasuk. The pasuk is in chapter 33 of Bereshit, Lamed Gimel, pasuk Daled. The brothers meet again after 34 years. What happens when they finally see each other? So I've not included this pasuk specifically. In other words, the one I'm about to say is not in the source sheet, but Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, bowed down 7 times to his brother, obviously showing a very conciliatory attitude towards his brother Esau. And what does Esau do when he sees his brother, his twin brother, whom he hasn't seen for 34 years? Vayaratz Esau likrato. And Esau ran toward him. Vayechabekehu, and he embraced him. Vayipol al tzavarav, and he fell on his neck. Vayishakehu, he kissed him. Vayivku, and he wept. Quite a number of verbs here. Do you see that? A lot of verbs in this sentence. Vayaratz, vayichabkehu, vayipol, vayishakehu, Vayivku. There's 5 verbs in one sentence. That's quite unusual. Wouldn't you agree? It's quite an unusual thing. And all of those verbs animate the commentaries. Every single one of those verbs. We're not going to deal with all the verbs. We're going to deal with 1 or 2 of them. But it is an incredible pasuk, because each one of those verbs is pregnant with meaning. What is it? Vayaratz, he ran. He couldn't walk. He could have walked. He could have sidled. He could have sauntered. He ran towards his brother, likrato. Vayichabkehu, he hugged him, he embraced him. Okay? Vayipol al tzavarav. What's the difference between embracing someone and falling on their neck? I mean, I'm not so big with the, Swiss finishing school etiquette here. But what's the difference between Vayichabkehu and Vayipol al tzavarav? so that you're going to see that the commentaries are very taken with this. Because it could have just said Vayichabkehu. Basically, it means the same thing. When you embrace someone, obviously, it's kind of, I don't want to say necking, but you know what I'm saying. It's, you throw yourself on that person. So, right? It's an affectionate embrace. So why does it need to say Vayichabkehu? It could just said Vayipol al tzavarav. Okay? Next thing, Vayishakehu, and he kissed him. That is really going to animate the commentaries. That's what we're primarily going to focus on today, is this Vayishakehu aspect. The fourth verb in the pasuk. And finally, Vayivku, and they cried. He cried, they cried. Why were they crying? So who was crying? What were they crying for? You're going to see that the commentaries, every single one of these verbs is important. Let's begin with the Midrash. I've kept the Hebrew in there, as I always do, but I've also included a translation, and we're going to read through the translation. It's source number 2, and the Midrash says as follows. Vayishakehu, he kissed him. If you look in the Torah, if you look actually in the way the Sofer writes the word Vayishakehu in the Torah, you will note, unusually, that there are dots on top of each letter. Did you know that occasionally in the Torah there is this phenomenon of dots on top of a letter? It's very unusual. It occurs, on about a dozen occasions in the Torah, however often it is, and I haven't counted. But there are occasional words in the Torah with dots on top of them. Now, anybody who knows about the way a Torah is written knows that it's written without vowels. Hebrew is a very unusual language. Most languages, modern languages, rely on vowels in order to enable pronunciation. Are you aware of that? We have 5 vowels in English. A, E, I, O, U. I remember learning that at the age of 5. A, E, I, O, U. What are those vowels for? So you have consonants, and in order to connect 2 consonants to each other and know how to pronounce them, you have vowels in between the consonants. Sometimes 2 vowels, because a combination of vowels may connote a different way of pronunciation. But essentially, if all you had was consonants in English, you wouldn't know how to pronounce any word. However, Hebrew, unusually, has no vowels. There are some letters that we use as vowels. For example, an aleph. For example, occasionally. For example, a vav. We've got 2 ways of pronouncing a vav if it's in a particular form in a word. But very often we have no way of pronouncing a word unless we know how to pronounce it. By the way, in modern Hebrew, that's a massive problem, because in modern Hebrew they chose, and I know the reason why, I'm going to tell you in a minute, they chose, when they created the concept of modern Hebrew, not to include vowels in the wording at all. What's happened is that it's because many modern words don't lend themselves to Hebrew consonants, that people in Israel mispronounce words because they've got no idea how to pronounce them, because there's no vowels, so they just read it the way they read it. They don't know if it's an A or an R or an E, or they've got no idea. They just see a consonant. The reason why the founders, or the progenitors of modern Hebrew, decided not to include vowels as part of modern Hebrew, or the re-embrace of Hebrew as a spoken language, was because Yiddish used vowels, and they wanted to get away from Yiddish. Yiddish not only uses vowels the way we use them in Hebrew with little dots and signs, but actually adds in letters. For example, an ayin in Yiddish is an E sound, and an aleph is either an A sound or an O sound. They wanted, the part of the idea of creating modern Hebrew was to pull away from the Yiddish and from the ghetto mentality of European Jews. So they created modern Hebrew. In as much as it was possible, they wanted that Hebrew to be a reflection of the classical Hebrew of the Tanakh and the Mishnah. So they decided not to include vowels. So if you read in a Hebrew, modern Hebrew newspaper, an Israeli newspaper, you'll discover words in there which you cannot pronounce even if you're very familiar with classical Hebrew. Why? Because they're essentially transliterations in Hebrew letters of English words. So whenever I read a modern Hebrew book, I struggle when I get to these words because I've never seen them before. I've never seen this combination of letters. Televizia. I have to tell you that if you read through the Tanakh, you won't find the word televizia. Psychologia. You're not going to find that word in classical Hebrew. But there's no vowels to help you understand how to pronounce it. So you have to, if you're, as I am, a reader of rabbinical Hebrew primarily, I struggle when I get to these transliterations of English words because I'm not familiar with them. Okay? So the reason I'm saying this is because if you read a Torah scroll, you will discover, and every bar mitzvah boy discovers this, that there's no vowels to help them read the Hebrew letters of the Torah. So if you have to study your parasha, you'll suddenly discover that you need to know how to read the words. You've got to memorize the way the words have been written with the vowels, so that when you read it in front of the community, you're going to know how to pronounce the Hebrew words. Now, why is this? Anyone know? Why is Hebrew, this classical language, it's ancient language, why does it not include vowels as part of the system by which it should be read?
Maybe it wants it to be open to interpretation.
Correct. That's exactly the answer. It's exactly the answer. Because, and I've said this many times before in shurim I've given, classical Hebrew, unlike modern languages, has very few root words. Tanakh, I believe, has 8,000, somewhere in the region of 8,000 root words. Mishnah, I believe, has 21,000 root words. I didn't check this before the shir, but from memory. English, 140,000. Okay? So it's got this huge differential between this classical language and modern languages. Why? Because many words actually have many meanings. And not just many meanings in terms of the root words potentially meaning one word or another word, but even the way you vowelize them may change the meaning, and the Talmud and Midrash use this methodology to interpret aspects of the scripture to give us messages that are hidden in the text. So the plain meaning of the text will mean one thing, but the interpretative meaning will mean something completely different. How is that interpretation employed? By changing the vowelization of the word. Okay, the one exception is this dotting of words in the Torah. There's certain words in the Torah that have dots on them. Okay? So one of those words can be found in this week's Parsha Vayishlach. And the word is Vayishakehu. A long introduction to source number 2 in your source sheet. Let's continue. He kissed him. Vayishakehu. The word is dotted above each letter. How do the Midrashic Talmudic sages interpret the dotting above the word, each letter of the word Vayishakehu, and Esau kissed Yaakov? Says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the fact that there are the same amount of dots as letters teaches us that Esau felt compassion in that moment and kissed Yaakov with all his heart. So I'm not going to refer to the Hebrew, I just want to tell you that generally speaking, the amount of dots is not equal to the amount of letters. So if the amount of dots is less than the amount of letters, that teaches you one thing. That means the letters are more important than the dots. If the amount of dots on top of the letters, as written in the Torah, is more than the amount of letters, that teaches you that the dots are more important, that the lesson of the dots is more important than whatever it is the letters tell you by the meaning of that word. Unusually, Vayishlach has a dot on each letter. Vav, Yud, Shin, Kuf, Yud, Hey, Vav, right? Every single one of those letters has a dot. That being the case, you're back in neutral territory because it's neither more of one nor of the other. So says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, what is it coming to tell you? It's coming to tell you that Esau actually went to kiss him and meant it. You might have thought that he didn't mean it. No. The dots that you might have thought were an interpretation one way or another are actually there to tell you, no, it's neutral. What it means is what it says, and what it says is what it means. That's the first part of the Midrash. Now let's continue. Says Rav Yanai. Rav Yanai challenges Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and he says to him, if so, why are there dots on top of the letters? What is the point of having dots on letters in the Torah? You know, the vast majority of the words in the Torah don't have dots on them. I mean, 99.9% of the words in the Torah don't have dots. Here you put dots. And now you're telling me those dots have no meaning, says Rav Yanai, in which case, leave the dots out. You didn't need to put the dots in the first place. Answers the Midrash as follows. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, to teach that he didn't come to kiss him, but rather to bite him. So his initial visceral reaction to Jacob when he saw him was hatred. But in the end, as he drew closer towards him, his fraternal feelings kicked in, and ultimately, when he kissed him with all his heart. But Yaakov Avinu's neck turned to marble. Oh, wow. This is a famous Midrash. I learnt it in school. Right? Everybody learnt this in school, that his neck turned to marble. What does that mean? I haven't the faintest idea. I wasn't there. I can't verify what a neck turning to marble actually means. It means his neck was hard. So Yaakov Avinu had a neck of marble, and Esau wants to bite him. Thus the teeth of that wicked one were blunted. He bit him, maybe he broke a tooth, he needed to book an appointment at the dentist. Thus when the text says, and they cried, so now we're going to look at another one of those 5 verbs. The final verb of the pasuk is vayivku, and they cried. Why were they crying? What were they crying about? Says the Midrash, according to Rav Yanai. You know why they were crying? This one, Yaakov Avinu, cried because his neck had turned to marble. Oh, who wants their neck to be marble? And the other one cried because he broke his teeth. So essentially, the vayivku here is not a vayivku of emotional joy, as it were, for 2 brothers meeting each other. This is a vayivku of pain. So Rav Yanai sees this completely differently than Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar saw the Vayishlach as a kind of revelation that Esau didn't really hate Yaakov. Esau met his brother and kissed him. Shimon ben Elazar says, Vayishlach, there's dots on it, the exact number of dots as there are letters. And the reason why there is this balance is because it says he kissed him, it means he kissed him. Says Rav Yanai, not possible. Actually, he came to bite him, and he did bite him. It could be in the end he kissed him and they reconciled. But in the beginning, initially, there was enmity between them, which is to be expected. Yaakov Avinu was protected by this miraculous marble necking, okay, whatever that means. And Esau's teeth were blunted. I mean, think about it. How old was Esau 34 years after Yaakov Avinu left? They were twins. How old were they at the blessings? 63. 34 years later, they were 97. I'm rather surprised that Esau had teeth at 97, frankly. But anyway, that's just my own point. The Midrash is not making a medical point. It's making a kind of, I don't know how to present it easily. It's making a political point, a sociological point. I don't know exactly how to say it. Essentially, the Rabbi Dunner wants to stress the enmity between Esau and Yaakov that still exists, and Reb Shimon ben Elazar wants to stress that actually there's fraternal feelings of love and affection between Esau and Yaakov. How are we to reconcile these two views of the meeting between the brothers, based on exactly the same words in the pasuk? Vayishlach means he kissed him. According to one interpretation, it's because he loved him, and according to another interpretation, it's because he hated him. He didn't really kiss him, right?
Both could be true.
Well, could be that they are conflicted. I want to understand what Chazal are trying to teach us about the relationship between Esau and Yaakov. That's really what my shir is about today. We're using this as a code. We're trying to decode this pasuk according to the mindset of Chazal to try and understand the relationship between Esau and Yaakov. How, by the way, it's not just Esau, the man who lived at the time of Yaakov Avinu. Esau becomes this concept of all Gentiles who hate Jews are called Esau. Are there Gentiles who have affection for Jews or not? And if they have affection for Jews, do they want to bite them but end up kissing them? That's really what this Chazal is trying to teach us. The pasuk means what it means, as we're going to see that Ibn Ezra is very insistent about that. But Chazal have a way of addressing this whole issue using the pasuk as the platform to understand the relationship, the dynamic of the relationship between Esau and Yaakov. Let's look at Rashi. So Rashi quotes two opinions that are to be found in a Sifri on Vayishlach. Vayishlach, by the way, is in Bamidbar, not here, but this happens to be in Vayishlach. There are also dots on letters, and the Midrash there goes through a whole series of different permutations of dots on letters to try and understand why those dots exist. Says the Midrash, talking about this particular pasuk, and he kissed him. Vayishlach. There are dots above the letters of this word, and there's a difference of opinion expressed in the Brisa and Sifri as to what the dots are intended to suggest. And now Rashi quotes the two opinions. Unusually for Rashi, he quotes them in the name of the two people who said them. Okay, no, only one of those. So usually what Rashi does when there's two opinions, first of all, there's two things you need to know about Rashi. Very important. I don't know how many of you are scholars of Rashi, but Rashi is very eager, as you know, to present us with what we call a pshat interpretation of a pasuk. He was taken to task by two people, principally, for his version of pshat. I'm giving you a bit of a history of this, okay? I think we've discussed it before, but I just want to give a bit of a background. Rashi was an incredible scholar, somebody who had the entire Chazal at his fingertips. And when Rashi offers us an interpretation of a pasuk, you can be very sure that he thought very long and hard, very carefully, as to how he was going to interpret a pasuk for posterity. He recognized that what he was going to say about a pasuk was the way this pasuk would be interpreted, not just in his own lifetime, but for centuries to come. So we now have to understand, looking at Rashi, why he chose a particular chazal over another Chazal, or indeed any Chazal at all. So when I said that Ibn Ezra and the Rashbam took him to task, Ibn Ezra is a Spanish biblical scholar, living not long after Rashi, and the Rashbam was actually Rashi's grandson. And he was a French-German, this Rhineland scholar. From both angles, they were not satisfied with what Rashi did. Why? Because often Rashi seems to have chosen a chazal over the basic meaning of the words. Okay, what do I mean by that? You're going to see Ibn Ezra is going to take him to task in a minute about this particular interpretation. Essentially, let's look at the word here in this pasuk. Vayishlach means, and he kissed him. What could Rashi have said as an easy explanation? Here we are, after all this anticipation about this grand and scary meeting between Esau and Yaakov, and it says Vayishlach. What's the immediate question that springs to mind? Really? Esau kissed his brother? Why didn't he pull out a knife and kill him? So what should Rashi say? Because he loved him. Does he have a chazal to support him? We know already that he does. We saw it in Midrash Rabbah, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So he could have just said, Vayishlach kipshutai. That's what it means. He kissed him, he loved him, they cried, they were emotional, it was a reconciliation, it was a reunion. Well, how are you going to present it? That's not what Rashi does. Rashi offers us two approaches to the word Vayishlach. Now, there's another element to this. Rashi, when he presents us with two opinions, usually presents us with an opinion that is pshat, and because the pshat doesn't make us happy, presents us with an opinion that's not quite pshat, but that could also be interpreted as a simple way of understanding it, because we're not going to be happy with the pshat. But when he does that, he doesn't use a name of the Tanna to identify the rabbi who produced that opinion. So Rashi is not there to record in exact detail the words of a Midrash or a Gemara. Rashi is simply there to inform us of an understanding of the pasuk which will enable us to move on to the next one, to the next verse. Here he does something extremely unusual. Not only does he give us two opinions, and we can kind of understand those two opinions because we know that the basic understanding of the word is puzzling, but he gives us a name identifying the second opinion. What's interesting is that his initial opinion is the one that you would least expect. It's not the pshat. It's the second opinion that's the pshat. So the first opinion is a homiletic opinion. It's a kind of, that's not the basic understanding of the word, it's a homiletic understanding of the word. The second opinion, the one he does in the name of a particular rabbi, and we'll see in a moment who that is the one that you would have assumed is the understanding of the word. What does it mean to kiss someone? Do you kiss someone if you don't like them? Of course not. You kiss someone when you like them. So now we're going to read the Rashi. That's by way of introduction. Do you understand what I just said?
Yes, but and Rashi does this all the time. But what's different here, I think, is that Rashi has a problem with the dots. Why the dots? So both of them are.
But he's using a but everyone's concerned with the dots, right. And Rashi is trying to use the dots as a way of offering a basic understanding of this word Vayishlach, which in a way is so shocking. How is it that I would understand, by the way, if Yaakov kissed Esau, right? Why? He'd sent him gifts. He was scared of him. He wants to make up with him. I would understand that. The thing you least expect is for Esau to kiss Yaakov. That's what you least expect in this story. In other words, how many times have I said this, Ruthie? Whenever we have stories in the Torah, we are hamstrung by the fact that we know the end of the story before we get there. So we are so busy with our knowledge that we don't look at the story. You know, when you read a book, I told this to Jonathan, if we read the last page of his book before we read the whole book, we wouldn't read the whole book, right? We know the end of the story. The question is, before we got to the word Vayishlach, how might we have expected Esau to react to seeing the brother who cheated him out of his birthright and the blessings and who ran away? How would we expect him to react? He's come with 400 men. What are we expecting here? We're expecting a bloodbath. Vayishlach. So Rashi is reacting the way we need to react, which of course we don't do because we know the story. The question is, why is he using a secondary understanding or a less obvious understanding of the word Vayishlach as his initial approach? You're suggesting it's because of the dots. And by the way, that's what he says. But then, if he did that, why bother bringing the second one? By the way, there are other opinions in the Midrash which he doesn't mention.
You know, if there weren't dots, why doesn't he get also by a Ratzei Likrat? That doesn't make. Why would?
Okay, I said you weren't here, Ruthie. I said there's 5 verbs in this sentence. How many psukim do you know in the Torah where there are 5 verbs?
He hugged him too. Why not?
Hugged him. They cried. 5 separate verbs in this sentence. The whole sentence doesn't make sense. So it lends itself to interpretation. Rashi is acting or is interpreting the way that we would feel. Come on, give us some understanding here. Open this up for us. Unlock it for us. We don't know what's going on. Okay, let's look at the Rashi.
Even if he was kissing him, it doesn't have to have been a positive thing. And we think of gangsters who
Okay, kiss each other. So you mean kind of a social kiss.
people that we don't like.
You know, in last week's parsha, I studied this in great detail. I didn't give a share on it. Maybe next year. Last week's parsha, we have this Jacob Avinu kissed Rachel as soon as he met her, right? And there's a bunch of Mefarshim who are horrified that Jacob Avinu would kiss a girl he'd never met, who he didn't know. How is it possible? Was it a proper kiss? Was it not a proper kiss? Did he kiss her on the mouth? Did he kiss her on the cheek? You've got to look at the Mefarshim. It's stunning because they are so taken with this. Obviously, people who are extremely careful in tznius, and they're looking at one of the Avos, and he's kissing. What is going on here? How is this even possible, right? I mean, we're not talking about the guy next door. He's not our neighbor. This is one of the Avos, Jacob Avinu. You're absolutely right. We've got to understand the context of the kiss, which is why the Midrash previously, the one which we looked at already, the Midrash Rabbah said, Vayivku doesn't mean they were crying because of emotional attachment to each other. This wasn't a cry of happiness, it was a cry of pain. They were in pain. One had his teeth knocked out, the other one had his neck bitten and turned into marble, whatever it was. Okay? Let's look at the Rashi. There are dots above the letters of this word. I'm reading the translation I put here in source number 3. And the difference of opinion is expressed in the Bryce and Sifri as to what these dots are intended to suggest. Some explain the dotting as meaning that he did not kiss him with his whole heart. Shaloi neshokoi b'chol liboy. However, there is a dissenting view, says Rashi. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. You know who Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was? He was one of the principal Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. What is he renowned for?
He was in the cave, right?
He was in the cave. Why was he in the cave? Because the Malchus Roimi were angry with him because he spoke out against the fact that they were forbidding the study of Torah. Who is Malchus Roimi identified with? Edom, Esau. So just using that as the backdrop, what does Reb Shimon ben Yochai say? Do you know what he says? Halacha hi beyodua she'Esav soinei liYaakov. Conceptually speaking, Esau represents the Gentile hatred of Jews. Esav soinei liYaakov. The default position of an Esau is hatred of Yaakov. Why? Esau represents the ultimate form of materialism, of opposition to God, of rejection of God. Yaakov represents this yearning for spirituality, this yearning for God, this yearning for the human role as a conduit between the heaven and the earth. It's a halacha. By the way, what does halacha mean? Not halacha like, okay, you have to say Shema every day. That's not what it means. Halacha means it's a certainty. Okay? I'll give you a scientific example. I've used it before in other shurim. We have a scientific certainty discovered by Sir Isaac Newton. An apple dropped on his head, and suddenly he said, bingo. I don't think he used that word. There's a thing called gravity, and then he defined it using physics. There's a thing called gravity. What does gravity mean? Gravity means that wherever you are on a planet, there is a force called gravity which pulls things towards the surface of that planet. It could be the moon, it doesn't really matter. Anything which is extremely large has a force that pulls things towards it. That is a certainty. Gravity is a certainty. You can't get away from it. There it is. Doesn't matter where you are. If you jump up, what's going to happen? You're going to come back down. Right? Everybody knows that. However, could you walk if you didn't defy gravity? No, of course not. Because every time you lift your leg to put it forward into the next step, you are defying gravity. See, even though there is a certainty, let's call it halacha, that there is such a thing as gravity, there is also a counterpoint, which is that there are methods by which that gravity can be defied. By the way, every time you've been in an aeroplane, you have defied gravity. The aeroplane took off and it flew at 38,000 feet to wherever it was going, and then it landed. It defied gravity. Halacha Esav soine leYaakov. What does that mean? It's not a halacha in terms of it being a law in the Shulchan Aruch. Halacha means that there is such a thing as a certainty, which is that what Esav represents, the ultimate form of Esav, is always going to be a soine leYaakov, to whatever Yaakov is. Now, there's many permutations of that. Nothing is black and white. There's lots of grey area in between, but ultimately we understand the concept. If you are a pure representation of what it is that God planned for his creation, anyone who opposes that is going to have tremendous antipathy towards you. Says Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, hiding in a cave from the Romans, who are identified by Chazal as Esav. It's a halacha, to Yodua. It's well known, everybody knows. Esav soine leYaakov. He's sitting there, he's scratching his head, thinking to himself, 1 second, but it says in the Pasuk, Vayishlach. How are we meant to understand the fact that if Esav soine leYaakov, Vayishlach, and he kissed him? What are we meant to say? Says Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, Elo shenichmuru rachmav ba'osashah. At that moment, his pity was really aroused. Unashokoi b'chol liboy, and he kissed him with his whole heart. I don't want to use this comparison, but I'm going to use it anyway. Okay? You know me by now. Imagine you're sitting in Auschwitz. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, right? Sitting in a cave. We're trying to find a comparison we can relate to. Halacha ki yodua, Esav soine leYaakov. There you are. You're in the midst of a Nazi hell. People are being murdered every day in a gas chamber. And you're thinking to yourself, but 1 second, the Pasuk says, Vayishlach. Do you know what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying? We're going to look at it in greater detail. That even in that situation, there is a moment, there is kind of a eureka moment, a bingo moment, where they can love you with all their heart. It's a remarkable revelation if you think about it. The word Vayishlach, the dots on the Vayishlach are there to teach you, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that it doesn't make any sense. Don't try and make sense out of it, because somehow when we're in the midst of, we face a world which is full of anti-Semitism, we're going to look at that. Somehow we have to understand that there are those who don't hate us. Not only don't hate us, but who actually have feelings of tremendous affection toward us. How are we meant to understand that? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, at that moment, look at it, look what the words are. Elo shenichmaru rachma ba'oisa shah unashokoi b'chol liboi. I'm not sure if you ever looked at this Rashi, you looked at it this way. I can't believe that. Most people don't. Most people look at the Rashi, okay, he's presenting two opinions. It's Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. We're not talking, it's Rashbi. We're not talking about just an opinion that he's quoting namelessly. Let's look at Ibn Ezra. Yeah, go on.
In that context then, I understand what you're saying. In other words, so Duty's example that it didn't make any sense that the UN voted for Israel.
We're going to get to that. It doesn't make sense.
But you're saying, so is it's a moment and then it goes away?
Could be.
In other words, do you look
Could,
at
but
it-
Oisa Shah, you're right, the word. But Oisa Shah. But no, of course it's a, you know why, how we know it's a moment? You know how we know it's a moment? Because gravity always applies. The gravity is always there. The natural reaction and response is negative. But Ba'oisa Shah, unbelievable, right? It's an unbelievable revelation. I'm going to look at Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra says, so Ibn Ezra, as I said before, is very much concerned with anything that kind of deviates from the, what we called in yeshiva, the Pashut Pshat, right? I know it's an alliterative term. Pashut Pshat means, come on, this is what it means. If somebody says, how are you? Then obviously they mean, how are you, right? They don't mean, what time is it? So if the Pasuk says, Vayishlach, what does it mean? He kissed him, says the Ibn Ezra. The Midrashic interpretation of the dots on top of the word Vayishlach and he kissed him is good for immature babies. That's what he writes. Look at it. La'asike mishodayim, those who wean from who wean from their mothers. That's what it means. Don't be childish. You want to teach a kid in school that Vayishlach means that, okay. However, but according to the straightforward interpretation, Esau did not plan to do evil to his brother. What's the proof? The word Vayivku, and they cried, just like happened at the reunion of Yosef and his brothers. There was love and affection between the two of them. So Ibn Ezra wants to just bring us back down to planet Earth without using gravity, and it tells us, when it says Vayishlach, it means what it says. When we read the Pshat, we can read the Pshat. We want to add homiletic interpretations and apply it to our lives as Chazal did. That's wonderful, but the plain meaning of the text is what actually happened that day. Esau and Jacob met, and they kissed each other, and they cried, and they were happy to meet each other, and they separated, they went on, back into their own lives, and that's what happened. Now, if we want to use Esau as a concept, and Yaakov as a concept, and see some interpretation of Vayishlach with the dots on the letters, do whatever you like. But what actually happened is what actually happened. Okay, let's look at Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, number 5 in your source sheet. Milas vayivku hi eidnemon lokach shelefonenu his galusoi shal regesh enushi tohor. He takes the Ibn Ezra and runs with that ball. Remember something very important. Emotions cannot be legislated. Emotions, it's a very interesting idea. And of course, in modern times, psychology has embraced this idea. And it's been hugely helpful in terms of giving people therapy. You cannot legislate emotions. If somebody has a feeling, there's nothing purer than a feeling. Do you know why? Because it doesn't come from your brain. Emotions comes from some other place. I mean, it may come from your brain. And what I'm talking about is not intellectual. It's not something that you can plan. I can't plan to be happy. Either I'm happy or I'm not happy. I can't plan to be sad. I always tell people when they've lost a parent or a loved one, I say to them, you're going to suddenly discover that you're very emotional about it, and you're going to think it's a bit embarrassing. I can't show anybody. I'm crying. I've got tears running down my face. I've got to run to my room. What are you talking about? There's no greater purity than that emotion. That's the real reaction. You're not intellectualizing it. You're not rationalizing. You're not saying, okay, they were old, they were sick, it's better for them, whatever it is you're going to say when an elderly parent dies, right? People have all kinds of rational... No. This is the visceral reaction, the emotional reaction of somebody who's lost someone that they loved. That's real. Says Reb Shamshon Fal Hirsch, Milas Vayivku, and they cried. He eid Nermon. It is an absolute testimony. Lokach, to that, Shelefonenu iskalusoi shal regesh enushi toher, that what we have revealed for us here is pure human emotion. Yochol Odom, Amnon and Nashik v'liboy bal imoy. It's possible for somebody to kiss and they don't feel it. She was saying earlier, it's possible for people to have social kissing, right? They hug each other, they don't really mean it. She used the idea of the mafia, they kiss each other, but they don't. The next day they can order a hit, right? And that's not what we're talking about, says Rabbi Hirsch. Ulam demois hamispartzois beregoim chazoko shein yoitzois meoimek halev. When people cry, I'm not talking about an actor, Hollywood actor maybe, but ordinary people in ordinary lives, they cry. And when they cry, they mean those. You can't fake those tears. Those are real tears. Vayishlach, what does the Pasuk tell us immediately afterwards? Vayivku, and they cried. These are two brothers, twin brothers, born together, brought up together in the same home, got into a bit of sibling rivalry, in a situation we're very unfortunate, separated for decades, now they meet up with each other. And with all this anticipation, Jacob is terrified, Esau is angry, suddenly they see each other. He ran towards him. He hugged him properly, kissed him, and they cried. You know why they're crying? Because they're brothers. In the end, that fraternal, that brotherly feeling that they had towards each other, that was real. That was the real. Not all the other stuff. This kiss and those tears reveal to us Kigam Esau hu mizera Avraham Avinu. A remarkable Rabbi Hirsch. Do you know who Esau is? Wicked as he is. Ultimately, he is a grandson of who? Avraham Avinu, the Avi HaChesed, the exemplar of kindness, of emotion, of feeling. That's who Esau is. The Einoirak Tzayid Parua. He's not just a warrior who wants to go hunting. Ki eich yochel hoya belav hochi lagia ledargas shalit bispatchus enushis. Otherwise, how is it possible that he was able to give the expression of his emotion in this way? Ultimately, there is a well of emotion within him and within what he's trying to say, within everybody who comes from a good origin, that is goodness in its greatest form of purity. Esau, in this particular moment, displays a side of him that is absolute perfection. Not that he's a perfect person all around, but in this moment, he is a brother who loves his brother. I don't want to read the whole thing. You can look through the whole thing yourself. Let's look at the Hamek Dover, number 6. V'yivku shneim bochu. Says Hamek Dover, taking Rabbi Hirsch's idea even further. Hamek Dover is the Netziv. He was the one generation after Rabbi Hirsch. Well, not quite. They kind of lived alongside each other. One in Lithuania, the Netziv was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch was the rabbi of the Orthodox community in Frankfurt. I think they were like 5-10 years apart in age. The Hamek Dover takes this idea a little further. Vayivku, they cried, Shnehem Bachu. The word Vayivku doesn't mean and he cried, it means and they cried. It's there to tell us that Yaakov, even Yaakov at that moment, also found within him a great love and affection for Esau. It was a two-way street, it wasn't a one-way street. Esau the wicked, who had intended to kill Yaakov, he's lived in fear for 34 years. Now he's confronted with his nemesis, his greatest enemy, the man who wants to kill him outright. The man runs towards him and kisses him. Do you know what his reaction is? He doesn't kind of stand there stiff. Vayivku, they both cried. They held onto each other like brothers and cried. V'chein ledoros, says the Netziv. Here it is. Here's the kicker. B'shoshe zera Esav mis'orim beruach tahara. When the inheritors of Esau's legacy, let's translate it that way, find within them a purity of spirit, lahakir es zera Yisrael ma'alosom, to recognize the descendants of Israel and their greatness and their value, az gam anachnu mis'orim lahakir es Esav, then we too must have a corresponding recognition of Esau. It should never just be a one-way street where we're taking and we don't give back. When we have those among the Esau, however you're going to define the Esau, who are kind to us, who recognize us, who appreciate us, who do good for us, we have to reciprocate with those same feelings, those emotions, and those ideals towards them. It's a two-way street, says the Netziv. Ki achinuhu, because Esau ultimately, even if he is our nemesis, as by the way is presented in Isaac's blessings and in Esau's, nevertheless, ultimately, when you boil everything down, when it all crystallizes around the facts, achinuhu, he's our brother. U'kamoishe Rebbe haya ohev amiti l'Antoninus v'chein harbe, says the Netziv. We see in the Gemara that Rebbe, the author of the Mishnah, the editor of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, was very friendly with Antoninus, who was the governor from Rome. It was a brotherly friendship. In other words, it's not either cold or neutral. It's cold or hot. And that is indicated to the Netziv by the word Vayivku, and they cried. It wasn't and he cried, it was and they cried. Now I'm going to read you a piece from Rabbi Yeshua Weitzman, who's the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Ma'alot in the Galilee. And he takes this idea and he runs with the ball. And by the way, I saw various examples of this. This was the most articulate. That's why I've reproduced it here. I'm not sure I'll finish the whole thing. I'll give it another 10 minutes and then I will leave the rest to you. A beautiful piece which really takes this idea and gives it the breadth and depth that we need in order to understand the dynamic of our relationship with the Gentile world. As Jews, and particularly as Jews who have ideals that are Jewish. I'm not talking about Jews who are more Gentile than the Gentiles. I'm talking about Jews who understand what it means to be Jewish and act on it. That's what we're talking about. And then there are Gentiles who, as we said before, force of gravity, their natural reaction to Jewish identity is negative. How are we meant to navigate that dynamic? Look what he says. There's many things that we can learn from this parsha. Al tzuras ha'ma'avak ben Yaakov le'Esav, about the how we should regard the dispute, the debate, the differences, the arguments between Yaakov and Esau. The tzuras hasyachsus shelonu le'umos ha'olam, and how we should correspond, how we should relate to the nations of the world. This parsha is the headquarters. If you want to understand it, this is it. By the way, he goes into a lot of detail. We're going to specifically focus on the points which we've raised. Namoid al nekuda achas. Let's look at one particular point, shedarsho isa Chazal b'tzura meyuchedes, which Chazal interpreted in a particular way. Rega hamifkash shel Yaakov ve'Esav. The actual moment of the meeting between Jacob and Esau, matuar kach. How is it expressed in the Torah? And he quotes the pasuk, Vayorat Esau likrosei. Esau ran towards him, his brother Yaakov. Vayichabkeyu, he hugged him. Vayipal tzavarav, he fell upon his neck. Vayishokeyu, and he kissed him. Vayivku, and they cried. 5 verbs in one pasuk. Esau rotz el Yaakov, says Rabbi Weitzman. Esau ran towards Yaakov. Yaakov choshesh. What is Yaakov's suspicion at this moment? What do you think Yaakov is thinking when he sees Esau behind him, 400 men running at great speed towards him? Ma olech liot? What's going to happen? Hem Esau hoilech litkofoto? Is Esau going to do him terrible harm, damage him, kill him? What's going to happen? Ach lebesof Esau mechabek umenashek et Yaakov. What happens at the end? He ran towards him. We're in great doubt how that's going to end up. What happened? He hugs him and kisses him. Hamilah vayishakehu ketuva b'sefer Torah b'tzurat miyuchedet. The word vayishakehu is written in a very particular, unique way in the Torah. Yesh nukudot me'al hamilah. There are dots above the word. B'sifri b'parshat Bahalotcha, and in the Sifri is quoted by Rashi, the Sifri in Baloischa, Yesh Reshima Milim and Nukudot BaTorah. There's a whole piece there about Nukudot which appear above words in the Torah. V'sham Darshim Chachamim et Mashmaut Shel Nukudot. And there, the Chazal offer interpretations as to the meaning of these dots. V'Rashi ala Pasuk Mevi et Divrei HaSifri. And Rashi brings the Sifri as we learnt earlier. Haklal hu kanireh. It would appear that the general rule is shekesheyesh nukudot me'al hamilah hen ba'ot lema'et et mashma'ut hamilah al derech hapshat. How are we to interpret a word according to the Sifri in Parshat Bahalotcha? How are we meant to interpret a word which has dots above it? Somehow it diminishes the obvious understanding of that word. In other words, the dots are there to tell you, don't take this totally as it appears. There's some other way of understanding this word. Al kach nechleku chachamim. But now there's a difference of opinion between 2 sides of the coin in Chazal. Hade'ah rishona soveret shenishika b'derech klal hi mikol halev v'zeh apshat. According to one interpretation, the nashika, the kiss, that any kiss, is generally speaking, when the word nashika is used in the Torah, it means that they were kissed with all their heart. Not the way we described earlier, the peck on the cheek or the mafia bosses. Generally speaking, the word nashika means, I kissed. That means I meant it. It's an expression of love and of strong feeling. Hanukudot kan ba'ot lema'et et hapshat. However, in which case, the nukudot, these dots, come to somehow reduce that interpretation, somehow take away from it. V'lomar shelo nashku b'chol libo. That Esau did not kiss Yaakov with all his heart. That would be the automatic assumption of dots above the letters of the word Vayishakehu. Aval Reb Shimon ben Yochai sover, Rashbi says, Shabshatu halacha hi biyadu she'Esav soneh liYaakov. Reb Shimon ben Yochai, sitting in his cave, says that doesn't make any sense. Why? Because we know that, the rule of law is that Esav sonel Yaakov, that whatever Esav is, hates Yaakov. That's the general rule that we all know to be true. In which case, what are these dots there to tell you? In which case, even though it says Vayishlach, actually the dot, it's like a double bluff, right? Your Vayishlach would have assumed, yeah, he kissed him, but he didn't mean it. The dots are there to tell you, no. Of course you would think he didn't mean it, but actually he did mean it. It's a double bluff, right? In other words, how do you here diminish the obvious interpretation by saying the nishka here, which you would have thought he didn't mean, actually he did mean. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is coming, he's adding an extra layer to this idea. Kalalhu belimud Rashi. It is a general rule when we study Rashi, Rashi mevi de'ah beyachad im shem hatana. If Rashi brings any interpretation and includes the name of the author of that interpretation, ha'amura she'amar ota, זה מלמד שיש קשר בין אישיותו ועניינו של התנא ובין האמירה שאמר. Then Rashi wants to tell you that there is a connection between the person who said it and what it is that they said. By the way, this is very unusual because, as you know, historically, there wasn't this historical approach to the study of anything, of any chazal. What he's saying here, and I'm assuming, I didn't check it, I'm assuming that there's proof for this, that generally speaking, as I said earlier, Rashi doesn't mention names. In which case we need to understand, because Rashi, there's a paucity of words. He doesn't just use words lightly, because, I know it's easy for us, we can just print a page and copy it in a photocopy and print it out. In those days, every word that you read had been written by hand. So he was very careful the words that he wrote, and particularly because he knew that what he was writing would be rewritten hundreds of thousands of times. Therefore, he didn't want to add in too many words if he didn't need to. Says Rabbi Weitzman, and I'm sure I have not studied the basis for this, that any time that Rashi mentions a name of a rabbi and associates it with a particular interpretation of a pasuk, it's there to teach you that there is a connection between that author, the person who came up with the opinion, and the opinion itself. So, in which case, Kan hevi Rashi et divrei Rashbi b'shem omram. Here Rashi brings Rashbi's name in association with this particular interpretation. In which case we need to understand his insistence on making the association. Al derech hapshat, Rashi mevi et shmo shel Rashbi kiven shadvarim kishurim elav b'ofen miyuchad. So the most basic interpretation, we mentioned this earlier, it's because there is a connection between Rashbi and his personal circumstances and that which he talks about, which is Esav, associated with Edom, associated with the Roman Empire, under whose auspices he falls, and because of whom he is incarcerated in a cave, or at least self-incarcerated. When he says Esav hates Yaakov, what's he talking about? He's in the midst of his own horrible circumstances because he's caught in a cave. Rashbi ne'elatz livrach litchabeh b'ma'ara mishum shediber sara machud romi, because he spoke against the might or the power of Rome, he spoke against the authorities, he was forced to run away and hide himself in a cave, Malchut Esav, and we know that the Roman Empire, Roman authority, is identified by Chazal as Esav. Lachen kan, b'pasuk yesh chidush, v'ayta zu neshika mikol halev, in which case Rashbi's interpretation here is quite unusual, and Rashi just wants to point that out, that you would have expected Rashbi to have the opposite opinion, that Esav hates Yaakov, and therefore this proves that he hates Yaakov. And no, Rashbi is saying, even in the midst of his own difficulties as a result of the descendants of Esav, nevertheless, he's honest enough, as it were, to offer an interpretation which puts Esav in a good light. That's al derech hapshat, ulam. However, nir'eh sheish lahavin et hadvarim Beroved amok yoter. Let's look at it much deeper and understand it in a much deeper and more profound way. Rashi mevi et advarim b'shem Rashbi, kiven shemekoram ha'amok hu b'pnimiyut haTorah. Ultimately, this is a powerful and deep message that can be drawn out of the Torah. Rashbi wants to convey something extremely important to us. And it's also brought in a separate ma'amar in the Zohar. Who is traditionally the author of the Zohar? Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And this is also in Parshat Vayishlach. Vayishakehu nakud milamala. The word Vayishakehu is dotted above. Shelo nashku birtzono. And you might say it's because he didn't kiss him fully with his own will. He didn't want to kiss him. This is absolutely remarkable. Amar Rabbi Abba. So how does Rabbi Abba interpret this? Vayishakehu is not with his full will. Vadai hu shenechlash ka'aso shel Esav b'sha'a shera'a et Yaakov. Let's be honest. Somebody runs to his brother and kisses him. Clearly, they're not angry. Because if they were angry, they wouldn't run towards them and kiss them and cry. That's not what's going to happen. However, it goes against his grain. Because really, he should have been angry with him. So how is it that at that moment, when Esau saw his brother, suddenly his anger disintegrated, dissipated, and he runs towards his brother and kisses him? What's going on? Says the Zohar. Mahatam, what's the reason? Mishum sheiskim imo hamumuneh hahu shel Esav. Va'al kein lo yachol Esav l'shlot b'ka'aso. Shekach hu. Kol hadvarim sheba'olam hazeh תלויים למעלה, וכשמסכימים למעלה תחילה, מסכימים גם כן למטה. It's a very frightening Zohar. Esav, the physical manifestation of Esav in this world is only there because somehow there is heavenly agreement for that Esav to exist. But we know what happened the night before. In the middle of the night, Jacob Avinu had a massive fight, which Chazal interpret as having been with the Sar Shel Esav, the heavenly representation of Esav. Who won the fight? Jacob Avinu. What happened at the end of the fight? The Sar Shel Esav gave a blessing to Yaakov. In fact, he changed his name to Yisrael. Esav, the next day, who's the physical manifestation of this concept, sees Yaakov. By all manifestations of Esav and the way we understand what Esav represents and the history between them, what's going to happen right now? He's going to march towards him with a sword and kill him, right? He couldn't. Why not? Because you need permission from above. Somehow, when there is an Esav that hates a Jew, somehow that's got something to do with what's going on in heaven. That's what the Zohar is saying. Don't imagine that this is something that's going on down here and that it's got nothing to do with what's going on in heaven. Look how he takes this forward. I know I'm going on a little longer, but you'll forgive me. It's such a fascinating topic. Esav nishak et Yaakov b'chol libo. Esav kissed Yaakov with all his heart. Ach lo haya ze b'rtzono. You should know, it wasn't his natural reaction. It's not something that he wanted to do. Hu harei ba im arba meot ish. We know that that's not what he wanted to do. What was his plan? He came with 400 men. Nobody comes with 400 men to kiss their brother. That's not why you come with 400 military men. The truth is, he wanted to do great harm to Yaakov and perhaps even kill him. Ulam hadvarim einam nikba'im kan ba'olam hazeh ela lama'ala. You should know, that's not the way things work out. They're not nikva here. Those decisions are not made here. Ultimately, those decisions are made above. Kivan shesharo shel Esav hiskim im Yaakov berachato. If it's true we know that the Sar of Esav had somehow reconciled with Yaakov and blessed him, Esav lo sholet al atzmo v'ka'aso lo mofia. In which case, the physical Esav cannot possibly be angry with Jacob and do what he wants to do against him. Hu megale pitom sherachamav nichmarim al achiv. That's the reality of it. When he sees Yaakov, he feels pity for him. He has a strong emotional feelings towards him. Amnam natan lanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu bechira bitchumim rabim. Of course, it's true that God gave us free will in every aspect of our lives. Ach etzem hatahalich, the ultimate, the way history unfolds, kegon milchamot udvarim gedolim nosafim, the great things that happen in history, those things, inam matchilim milmata. These are not things which come about as a result of free will. The little things that we can choose to do or not to do, those are things that we have control over. But the giant movements of history, those are things that are not decided here. Ela b'sarei ha'umot ha'lema'ala. They get decided, as it were, by the sarei, the malachim, the angels that control the nations that live in heaven. Ba'olam ha'elyon korim hadvarim. First, the things happen in the olam ha'elyon, umisham hem mishtalshelim eleinu le'olamenu. And from there, they unfold, as it were, in our world and to us. Alkein Omer Rabbi Shimon. Now let's go back to what Shimon bar Yochai said. What's the halacha? What's the natural law? Hanoheg sheba'olam hu she'esav soneh leYaakov. The default is that whatever it is that Esav is, soneh leYaakov. That we know for sure. We don't need, by the way, you don't need a science book for that. Just look at a history book. Anu makirim et ze mikarov. And we know it from very close to us. Anu yodim kama antisemiyut yesh ba'olam. We know how much anti-Semitism exists in the world, and it's inexplicable. It makes no sense. Why are we the focus of so much negative attention? It's not rational, but it seems to be a natural law. Esav soneh leYaakov. Doesn't matter if you're right wing, it doesn't matter if you're religious, if you're an atheist, if you're left wing, you're socialist, you're communist. Everybody has some reason why they don't like Jews. What is it? Halacha, it's a natural law. Esav soneh leYaakov. Whatever it is that Esav is, soneh to whatever it is that Yaakov is. Sinat Esav leYaakov hi davar barur. We don't need scientific proof for it. It's something that's self-evident. Aval. Afal piken, nevertheless, anu ro'im sherachmei ha'umot mofi'im klapei Yisrael. We see that there's another side to this, which is that there is an incredible compassion towards Jews, also from the Umot HaOlam, which also actually makes very little sense. Umot HaOlam mesayot lanu b'neshek ub'dvarim nosafim ad ma'od. In Israel, every single gun used by an IDF soldier in Israel is the property of the US Army. It says it on the gun. Did you know that? Every single gun. Even so, I believe that they're made here, and that the guns that are used by the soldiers are the property of the US military. But yet, we have them. How do you explain it? How is it even something that makes sense? We need to understand that reality is not something which begins in our world. It's not something which we initiate. Why? It's not possible to initiate it. Esav soneh leYaakov, that's the default, that's the gravity, that's the reality, that's the scientific fact. Ela nikba'im lemala. It is something which is established, as it were, in heaven. Shemaskimim milemala letovat am Yisrael. When heaven agrees, or when heaven comes to the, as it were, decision that this is the way things should turn out for the Jewish nation, that's the way it's going to happen. Ha'umot lemata pa'alot kach benigud letiv'am v'lirtzonam. You know what happens then? Esav sees Yaakov, vayaratz likratav, he runs towards him, vayichabkehu, and he hugs him, vayipol al tzavarav, He falls on his neck. Vayishlach, and he kisses him with dots on top because it doesn't make any sense. It's against the natural law. Vayivku, and he cries, and we cry. That is a reality that's not up to us. We need to recognize that whenever we have support from wherever it is within the Gentile world, it's not something we can take for granted. That is not the natural law. And therefore, we need to, as the Netziv said, not just recognize it and expect it, but recognize it for what it is and reciprocate with our kindness and our warm feelings and thank them for the support that we're getting. We'll leave it here for today. There's more. You can look at it, but we'll leave it here.